Welcome to another episode of Supernova Lab District 6 Technologies Inc. Mastery Series, where we have conversations with industry game changers in the Caribbean and in the diaspora. I'm Jonathan Sylvester, co-founder of District 6 Technologies, along with my business partner, Javon Robinson. We lead you through a series of discussions and give you insights to critical topics impacting Barbados and the wider Caribbean. In line with Supernova Lab's ARC Academy's mission, this six-part series is designed to equip innovators, researchers, and emerging founders with access to insights from our region's best minds to build mission-driven experiments. Today, my esteemed colleague Javon will be discussing island innovation, climate solutions, and circular economies from the edge with Racquel. Racquel is a CEO of the Caribbean Climate-Smart Accelerator, where she leads regional efforts to mobilize investment into climate resilience, sustainability, and innovation projects. With nearly 20 years of business and ecosystem leadership experience, she works closely with governments, investors, and entrepreneurs to co-develop scale solutions for climate adoption and mitigation across the Caribbean. If you are a climate investor and policymaker, entrepreneur, ecosystem builder, or a development finance stakeholder, this is the critical episode to tune into. That being said, spread the word, like and subscribe to this series, and join our community. Over to you, Javon.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and welcome, Racquel, to the Mastery Series. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderfully. Thank you so much, Javon.
Excellent to have you. So we're here today to have a good conversation. We're going to be talking about island innovation, climate solutions, circular economies, all that fancy stuff, or maybe not. The conversation around climate change is an active conversation around the Caribbean, as you're very familiar with. Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley, she's been very active internationally in that regard, as well as other leaders, yourself to be included, around the region and internationally. Now, as we kick into our discussion, small island states, as they say, often portrayed as victims of climate change. Now, from your perspective, Racquel, why would you say this narrative, or would you say, I should ask, if this narrative is incomplete? And if it is, what is actually missing from that conversation?
Thank you so much, and what a great question. We're starting
Yes, hot. Yep.
starting with a bang,
Off
and
the press.
it's the perfect question to ask, because a lot of times we sit in our victimhood, and I'm not saying that we are not, but when you see things like Hurricane Melissa hitting Jamaica, and Jamaica issuing a masterclass in resilience by setting up, for example, their catastrophe bond, from which they would have made 150 million after only making a single interest payment. And that is something that is a global innovation in how they have built their resilience financially against that storm. And there are so many opportunities. If we are going to meet this climate crisis with solutions, I think the thing that we often forget is that there will be one, money spent, and two, beneficiaries. And why not us? As the people on the front lines, we have to be thinking about how does everything that we know that operates today, how is that likely to change? And what are some of the opportunities that we can then transition to ensure that we are part of the ones benefiting from those changes, rather than just sitting in victimhood and only thinking about what could possibly go wrong.
And that's a very interesting, opening salvo, if you want to call it that. And you mentioned Jamaica, and I know when the hurricane happened in Jamaica, I was very impressed when with the bond and everything that Jamaica decided to take action on, so to speak, in terms of responding to Hurricane Melissa. Now, victimhood. Would you say, for instance, that small island economies are uniquely positioned to test and deploy different climate response solutions, such as what Jamaica have done after Hurricane Melissa?
Definitely. I think our vulnerability provides us with a a unique perspective on climate, and we also have the moral authority because we are sitting in the impact.
Hmm.
So, yes, we can test solutions at scale because we are small. And again, Jamaica was an excellent indicator of that. But also because we are on the front lines, I think we can uniquely look at what does adaptation need to look like. Mitigation so far, and when you look at like Climate Policy Index, they have issued lots of reports on the amount of climate finance that has been going through. I think since there was a report on 2021 and they just came out with a 2024 report.
Okay.
It looks at how much of the money is being spent on mitigation, and that's up to 90% plus is being spent on mitigation. Very, very little is being spent on adaptation, and there's a good reason for that. Mitigation is preventing the changes from happening. Adaptation is how do we adapt to the changes as they are occurring.
You
But
know,
because,
sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no,
No,
no, you
no,
go.
no. So when we think about ensuring that we are reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, much of that is changing to renewable energy. And that has a natural cash flow with it, which is why the funding is going there. The adaptation, there isn't always a natural cash flow. So, how do you protect yourself when the storm comes? Is it that you build a seawall? Who's going to pay for that? Or is it that when you get the heat waves, how do you reduce the impact of heat? How do you reduce the impact on changing climate on crops? And all of those, it's much harder to figure out what is the cash flow because it is more preventative than it is, well, I'm changing a system that already has an existing cash flow, and so there's money to be made in it. But because we are in the environment, we
Uh,
can look at what are some of the systems and then think about, okay, how do we turn that into a business opportunity?
it's quite interesting what you mentioned there just now. And what came to my mind, Raquel, I have heard many of our leaders, they go to the United Nations, they go to COP, wherever they're having COP around the world, and they make a case that these bigger countries, they pledge, hey, we're going to give 2 million or 2 billion towards whatever, or 800 million, and the money never comes. And small island developing states are left feeling the impact. And I know Prime Minister Motley has been very passionate about this particular aspect in terms of you're promising, but the Caribbean doesn't pollute, for instance, like the bigger economies do, for obvious reasons. So, how do we fill that gap from a Caribbean perspective where we feel the impact of climate change, Hurricane Melissa, et cetera, and the bigger countries are the ones doing the polluting, promising they're going to help, but then they don't. So then where are we left?
Such a great point. So, first of all, on the issue of Mia Mottley, she is not just making the case, but she's incredibly effective on a global
Hmm.
stage. She is
Hmm.
the champion for
Yeah.
climate action across the world. And she's not just talking about it, but the Bridgetown Initiative, we are actually beginning to see changes based on her recommendations and the team behind her on the Bridgetown Initiative. So we see that as being very, very exciting. We hope that they get the due credit for some of the disaster clauses within some of these contracts for funding, because that's
Okay.
a huge deal.
Okay.
So there
So,
is that's one thing. The
mm,
second thing is the issue of the money. And listen to me, I have been talking till I'm hoarse about specificity around the money, because we talk
yes.
about the latest figure is like 100 billion a year, and how do we get to that point to be able to fund the necessary action for climate. But we don't specify, is that 100 million in grants, 100 million in loans, 100 million in concessionary loans, 100 million uh sorry, 100 billion in equity. We're not
Hmm.
specifying what that money needs to look like. So there are lots of people, and still with that vagary around the money, it's still not happening. And so it is that we need to be more specific, but we also need to be more strategic. So how do we then specify what it is that we need and make that case. But
Mm-hmm.
we also need champions, because we talk about leaders talking to leaders, but leaders are impacted by their constituents. So if we don't have the voters in the countries where these decisions need to be taken, if they are not on our side and we are not making the case, and we're making the case not from the position of, well, it's a moral thing to do. Yes, some people are going to make the decision on that basis, but others are not. If we
Yeah.
talk about, well, listen, you're creating mass immigration from the region. Is that what you want? And
Mm-hmm.
suddenly you find, oh, you're seeing how immigration is being treated globally right now.
Yeah.
Nobody
Yeah,
seems
so
to
it's a
want it.
whole
Okay,
different
if
conversation.
you want
Yeah.
to stay in our yard, as the Jamaicans would say, then
Yeah.
ensure that the place that we are in remains livable, so that we
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
don't have to come into your spaces. So
Yeah.
I think it is finding a multitude of messages, but also continuing to pressure and press on the powers that be, and making a case for, this is how much money we need, and this is what we need it for, and this is how we need that to move forward. And I think that there are pockets moving forward. Jamaica, Barbados as supreme examples,
Uh-huh.
but I also think that where you see, things like the Bridgetown Initiative, that is making a difference.
Yeah, yeah, which is pretty good, And conversations around climate change, always will evoke strong emotions amongst Caribbean people. We suffer from the impacts of it, and Jono, yourself, you live in Barbados, from Jamaica. I'm sure, you yourself, have had certain experiences dealing with, well,
Yeah.
hurricanes in Jamaica, different, in Barbados.
Absolutely. I think
Mhm,
we tend to focus in on hurricanes because they're absolutely devastating. I mean, I was a young man when Gilbert hit Jamaica. I saw and understood the impact of that. It changed so much in the economy
mhm,
because it changed how we built houses. It changed, our roadways. It changed so much, and laws around tree height and things like that. But there are other disasters that hit the Caribbean. We're suffering from a shortage of water in the region, as
right.
basic as water, right? St. Lucia, just this morning, the Prime Minister said, look, we need to spend $200 million on upgrading the plant. And the
Hmm.
hoteliers have said, you know what? It's going to be cheaper for us to transport water from Dominica to St.
Wow.
Lucia
Yeah.
on a barge, and just bring the water in. It's going to be cheaper to do it that way.
Yeah.
So, there are solutions that people and different areas are finding. So water is one. We had the right at the end of COVID, when we got the all clear here in Barbados. We
Hmm.
started to open up our doors and thought, great. 2 days later, the volcano erupted it was in Dominica, right?
St. Vincent? St.
In
Vincent.
St. Vincent, sorry, in
Yes.
St.
Yeah.
Vincent.
Hmm.
And the ash cloud blew over Barbados,
Yeah.
right? So we
Yeah.
had to lock down again. So
Yeah.
we spent another 5 days under lockdown and seeing ash falling, and it was so surreal. So we've gone from hurricanes to water to volcanoes
Hmm.
erupting in our
Yeah.
region, and there are others. How do you, how do you advise governments and institutions on
Hmm.
looking at all and trying to predict all of those different things, that might occur, and how do they respond to you advising them on what to do?
Yeah.
So for us, it is less of us advising them on what to do, because to give regional governments credit, they are well aware of what needs to happen in this rapidly changing environment. And there's also the issue of flood, and there's so much,
Yes.
so
Yes.
much
Yes.
swift damage that can happen. And so we're having both a water and a drought problem and a flood
And a
problem
drought, right? All at the same time.
Oh,
It's
it's a lot.
it's
at
wild.
the same
Yeah.
time. So what we advocate for primarily is to look at the centers of excellence across the region. When we think about places like Bermuda, and I know, there's always this discourse whether Bermuda is Caribbean or not Caribbean.
Yeah, yeah,
When
yeah.
when you're in Bermuda, it is absolutely Caribbean. The people
Caribbean.
are people, but they have based on the type of rock on the ground in Bermuda, they are incredibly water secure because each household collects its own water, and they have a
Okay.
filtration system beneath each house that then allows that house to be in water independent. And that is
Okay.
something that we're not seeing being replicated anywhere else in the region. Costa Rica is one of 7 countries globally that is almost able to run exclusively on renewable energy. Yes, a lot of that is hydro, but at least from a perspective of how do we get to that point, we think about some of the G20s. We can look within our region for
Yeah.
how do we do it. The penetration of solar water heating is something that Barbados
Oh
can
yeah.
boast,
Oh yeah.
whereas and other islands have not yet taken up the charge to replicate either the policy framework or the creation of that industry. And so
Mm-hmm.
there is so much that can be done and learned from our neighbors. So this issue of regional collaboration and coming together and saying, let's cherry pick the best of what each island is doing. The OECS, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, they are phenomenal at collaboration and acting as one. And
Yes.
so that is something that the rest of us can also learn in terms of group procurement and policy framework operating as a single unit whilst
Mm-hmm.
maintaining sovereignty. And so what we advocate for is look to your neighbors as to what they are getting right and choosing to replicate those things, and then seeking to also share with others what your center of excellence is. For example, in Barbuda, outside of the Pacific, they have the greatest per capita access to the Green Climate Fund. And it is because of people like Ambassador Blacklane and specific steps that they have taken to access these global funds. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot that we can learn from them as to
Yeah.
how they.
When we talk about climate change, and we're having our conversation here today, which is pretty interesting actually. And there's several things that have been popping into my mind as you spoke just now. But let me stick on this one for now. We talk about climate change, we talk about our leaders, and we've referenced several of them here in our conversation today. But sometimes we tend to forget the local buy-in from the business people, the private sector, the schools, the churches, the community groups. How do you think, or what initiatives, let me ask it this way, Raquel, do you think could be instituted to get community buy-in? And because the Caribbean people, we sit back and we listen to PM Motley, we listen to PM Drew, et cetera, and we think, okay, they're doing their thing, and then, but still, we're still dropping bottles on our beaches. You know what I mean? We're still polluting and all the different things that we're doing, which may seem insignificant, but in our small, tiny economies, it means a lot. So how do we get that community buy-in? What more needs to be done, do you think?
Think there's a lot more communication, things like this platform, for example, to make
Hmm.
sure that we're getting people understanding the link between what's happening on the global stage as it relates to climate action and what is the impact. So people at times see floods or droughts or, the hurricanes. I think the hurricanes are pretty well established that the
Yeah.
the the changing patterns and the impact of those hurricanes is being exacerbated by climate change. But a lot of times people will see a flood and not understand this is the way that this flood has manifested is
Hmm.
because of the impact of climate change.
Yes.
And people talk about civil society groups, other NGOs, and even governments talk a lot about when they're trying to get communities to leave areas that are increasingly facing risk of flooding, that people, if they get flooded and move, they try to move back, or they refuse to move
Yeah.
and are traumatized during a flood and then still stay. So I think the messaging and getting out the messaging to everyday people and things like when I see people littering and throwing trash out,
Hmm.
into a gully. I'm
Yeah.
always amazed. I'm like, in this 2026, are you
Right.
kidding
Are
me?
you kidding
Are you
me? Right.
kidding me? Do you
Yeah.
understand that this not only is it damaging your food system and
Yeah.
introducing microplastics to your food system, it
Hmm.
is also making the flooding risk
Yeah.
worse.
Blocking
Worse.
So
drains, etc.,
there is
etc. Yep.
right, there's no win in the
Yeah.
throwing plastics out of a car window or throwing plastics into a gully. And yet it's happening. So we definitely need to get the wording out. And I do think if I were to critique our industry a bit, we are often very sort of high and mighty. And also we use language a lot of times that isn't accessible. So to the man on the street, they're like, I don't understand what that has to do with me. And this mitigation and adaptation and all of this kind of fancy thing and the
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
food
What
and
does that
this and
mean?
that and the other. Like
Yeah.
I don't get it and I don't want to get it.
We forget the audience. We forget the
We f-
audience that
that you're
we're
talking
talking
to.
to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
We use this
we have to we
vernacular, this
have to
big. Yep. Hmm.
we have to bring people in and we have to
Hmm.
and we have to do that from a place not of judgment or
Yeah.
moral superiority, but a
Correct.
place of listen, we will either all succeed or fail together.
Hmm. Hmm.
Correct.
Hmm.
Correct.
So
Correct.
that's the thing that I think we need to do.
I'm thinking, Raquel, you spoke just now when you mentioned the drain in the gutter thingy. I think of I'm from Montserrat. That's where I was born. That's where I'm from. And let's say when I was growing up, Montserrat, and we were very clean, very proud of our beaches, blah, blah, blah. Now more and more I'm hearing about beach cleanups and communiques on the radio station about persons who are dumping their debris or all their household material stuff in the guts and stuff like that. And I thought to myself, well, is there also an element of cultural sensitivity? And I'll explain to you what I mean. You know the Montserrat story. We had the volcano that, John referenced volcanoes a while ago. Volcano destroyed most of the island, blah, blah, blah. A lot of our people move abroad to England. I moved to England. But we had a situation now where we had an influx of people who are not Montserratians. And not to lay blame, but I'm just saying you had a situation now where the pollution issue became even more exacerbated, which we never had en masse before. So I'm wondering, to what element do you think, or maybe I'm off track here, does cultural sensitivity play in terms of actions on climate change from that community personal perspective?
I think it's everything. I think this culture of individual versus community will take us all down individually and as a community. We
Yeah.
have to start thinking differently and acting differently because we're seeing it like all over the place, right? You're thinking in terms of right now and just today and not in the future. And so we have to find a way to have those kinds of cultural and values based breakthroughs. And I
Yes.
wish I
Yeah.
could tell
Yeah.
you like how that happens, but but we have to return to caring about your neighbor and ensuring that listen, let's just live as decent human beings. And I'm not going to call any names, but you're seeing political figures who clearly don't hold those values being elevated and um, appointed to the highest offices.
Yeah.
And, and that, in no small part, starts to change the way that we think, not only about leadership, but about social responsibility and about how we act towards each other. And we have to start moving away from that. I think it starts in the home, the way that you talk to your children, and the kinds of values that you model in that environment, because we have to do better.
I can tell you what you just said is going to be a clip from this whole series.
Sure. For sure. For sure. For sure. So, Raquel, I have another question. When we look at the region, and I was really enjoying the idea of cherry picking from each country what we can do best. If hydro is really good in Costa Rica, that should be a big thing in a country with similar topology, maybe St. Lucia, that has lots of rivers, has a lot of power that can be generated in are they talking to each other? And is there a mechanism for those? So in St. Vincent, the Hurricane Blue, what lessons learned from Montserrat? Are those conversations happening, and are they being encouraged? And is there a space for those conversations to happen?
So I want to make sure that as it relates to hydro, that I'm clear that there are tons of environmental concerns around hydro. And
Right.
while I am a practical person and I would prefer that we get to 90 to 100% renewable energy as efficiently as possible, I also understand the impact of things like hydro on indigenous communities and on the
Right.
environment.
Sure.
I don't want that to become unclear.
No, no,
No,
no.
that's
But
fine.
You're
I'm
like,
about to ask a
oh,
question to get
she's
educated because
advocating
She's
climate
advocating hydro.
and next thing you
No,
know,
no,
you
no. As an example, right?
you have me in trouble. But I do think that we need to be looking at the energy mix and being practical about it. And I know
Hmm.
that concessions will have to be made, right? However, are those conversations happening? They are happening, but not nearly enough. Are they being encouraged? Absolutely, they're being encouraged. But we definitely need to have more active action on this is what is going well for me. How can we support you in getting that done as well? And I know, we are a region inundated with needing to do more with less. We get less funding. We have more people doing many jobs because we lack the economies of scale. But oftentimes, culturally, we would rather ask somebody far afield than somebody next door for
Yes.
advice on what
yeah,
we're doing.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
we have to start realizing that the capacity that we build in this region will continue to redound to us. And the capacity that we build for others will not necessarily enlighten us as a region.
Yeah.
So we have
I
to start
completely agree.
thinking about each other differently, trusting each other more, and being willing to work together and learn and release the ego and be willing to learn from each other and say, here are the things that you figured out that I haven't, and here
Right.
are the things that I've figured out that you haven't.
yeah,
And let's see how we can collaborate to create a better region.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's surprising that that doesn't happen on a larger scale more because of the nature of our region. A lot of the leaders have gone to school in Jamaica or in St. Augustine, or they're intermarried between the islands. I mean, my wife is St. Lucian, and there's that full mix within our region. We live in Barbados. Grew up in Jamaica. We're all over the place.
Grew up in England, blah blah. Yeah,
England, my father's Grenadian, my mother's Bayesian, so there's a vested interest in all of these islands, and there's in terms of the people, we're
Yeah.
all interconnected some way, somehow.
hmm
And it's just surprising that, you know, each island for a long time. I think that landscape is changing. I think, we're starting to look at each other, especially since COVID and especially since collectively we were able to barter for vaccines and support as a group. I think they saw that and thought, okay, well, maybe we do need to, rely on each other a bit more and not just stay in our little silos and our corners. But it's surprising that it hasn't really pulled together, especially when it comes to climate, given the numerous disasters that we've had certainly over just the past five
yeah,
to 10 years.
yeah, yeah.
And I don't want to give the impression that there isn't collaboration taking place at the national level, right? But is it enough? I don't think so. And
hmm
and and I would love for somebody to come and correct me and say, listen, this is all of the collaboration that's taking place, and you're absolutely wrong. And I'm like, oh my God, I'll
Okay, great.
celebrate my wrong and be like skipping and dancing happy tune. I was wrong, everybody.
yeah, yeah,
You're living that.
yeah.
Yeah. But when you look at things like, I think that there are a couple of things that you can look at, right? When you look at the intra-regional trade in the EU, it's 70%. In the Caribbean, it's 17%. So
Yeah,
so our reliance on each other is far less. The other challenge that we face is the interconnectivity, and there are lots of similarities that we share with Africa, and that is one of the most limiting, that there is not a lot of interconnectivity. It's oftentimes, and this is 100% true. I live in Trinidad, and if I want to go spend a weekend in Barbados, half the time it's cheaper for me to go to New York. It is always cheaper for me to go to Miami
Yeah.
than it is for me to go to Barbados. That's
Yeah.
insane. That's insane. It's a 45-minute flight, right? And so our connectivity impacts our opportunity for trade. CARICOM, I think last year, it might have been last year or the year before, had tested the first sort of settlement transaction. And that was something that they had a fully functioning transaction system that did not require on solely on US dollars. And then they tested that again. It fell apart a little bit, and then they're now coming back. And that is the kind of thing that we need to be doing. It is figuring out how do we trade more with each other, because we are more dependent on each other than we are not.
Correct.
And then, Africa Exim Bank is now in Barbados and doing great work. How do we now create more global South-South collaboration? Because again, we are the underdogs. The more that we can support each other in building our strengths, the better off we will be. But we have to figure out those structures. And not to be a conspiracy theorist, but there are forces that don't want to see that happen, right?
Correct.
And they may be subtle, or they may be overt.
Overt.
We also have to figure out what we need to do in our own best interest. That if we continue to create greater dependence upon each other, this will reverberate for generations. And we have to invest in that now.
This conversation could go several ways tangentially based on several things over the last 10 minutes or so of the conversation. And, it's one of those things, Racquel, you're busy, but as we move along with this series and even in the future, we could come back and touch on some of these topics that we've sort of alluded to in our last 5-6 minutes or so. But what I hear from you is passion, amazing passion, love it. You moved into climate change, well, let me say environmental concerns as a wider topic, so to speak, coming from I think finance. Well, you correct me if I'm wrong. Previous background, let me put it that way. So, could you tell us what stirred your passion to come into this field, so to speak, and doing as wonderful as you're doing? Talk to us about that.
Well, thank you so much, Siobhan. And I think you want to get me in trouble, because some of these threads that you want to pull out will reveal my not just passion, but some of these boxes that I stand on that may not necessarily be globally popular, right?
Okay.
So
I hear that.
We'll see what I'm willing to delve into. But I came to this from IT. I had a long, my career was almost exclusively IT, and that's where I met Jono and his brother and his dad and the whole family. And I still consider myself at my core a technologist, right? Because a lot of the solutions that we think can solve the challenges that we're facing, we think are technologically based. And I came to this through a number of, it was almost like roots of a tree converging, or like you're coming from the outskirts and you're coming up to the trunk of the tree. I was head of InvestTT, which is the investment promotion agency for Trinidad and Tobago, and we were looking at a solar assembly facility in Trinidad. I then went on to become head of Microsoft Trinidad, and we were testing Internet of Things devices for oil spills. And in that process between those two, I also had my second daughter. And so my husband and I were thinking about, okay, well, college, and how much money do we need to set aside for her college? And college is obviously 18 years out. And the IPCC, the agency that talks about, predictions on climate and what's happening and what kind of time we have for the changes that need to be made, started talking about you have 12 years before the changes that we're facing are irreversible. And I said to my husband, we're talking about something 18 years out, and we don't know if 18 years out there will be a place to be talking about.
Yeah.
What are we doing? And I said to him, I said, I don't know if I'm not actively working on this as a solution, if I would be able to sleep at night looking at this baby, wondering what kind of world have we brought her into.
Yeah.
So when this opportunity came up, I said to them in the interview, I said, listen, you can hire me or not hire me. That's entirely up to you. But you will see me in this space because I am now compelled to act, compelled to advocate, compelled to be a part of the solution in whatever way, shape, or form. And that is what drives me and compels me to be a part of this. But what I've discovered from being in it, and I will not lie to you, it is hard. It is hard. It is so hard.
Yeah.
Like
Heavy lift.
all day, every day. But let me tell you,
Yeah.
It's a heavy
most
lift.
days, it is tough.
I hear that.
But there are opportunities to be had. And when we talk about this only as something to fear and run from, and we don't talk about the business opportunities, we don't talk about the investment opportunities, we don't talk about the money that's being spent that we need to be benefiting from, then we're losing the plot. This is going to create an entirely new economy, and we are right now on the back foot. We have the ability to move forward. We have the ability to leapfrog, and we have to think about it in those terms. Otherwise, this, like AI and everything else, will miss us. So, and just a quick note on AI. The building of data centers to support AI is exploding, and they need more energy. Many of the Caribbean islands, especially the geothermal islands, will produce far more energy than they will ever be able to use domestically.
Yeah.
So they need to start capitalizing on some of those AI data centers. And
Yeah.
how do we attract those so that we can not only afford to access the energy that we have, but also how do we be a part of the future economy?
That's a brilliant point you raised there for continuity. As you were talking just now, you talked about, opportunities, and it leads to the question I would love to ask, and especially for a lot of the younger persons, even older members of the community listening to our podcast, thinking, okay, right. Again, we use these big terms: the green economy, the blue economy, and most people are like, what are you talking about? What's that? You know what I mean? So, in terms of the opportunities for entrepreneurship, business development, you alluded to a few there just now. Could you enlighten our audience, even ourselves here, me and Jono, as to how folks could get involved and reap benefit business-wise while also contributing positively?
Sure. I'll tell you, 80% of our pipeline are food security projects, people who are figuring out more efficient and effective ways of growing their own food. We have launched a climate-smart agriculture hydroponic project across 7 islands in the region, using technology to grow food and grow food indoors and more abundantly. But we're seeing a lot of that where people are doing like vermicompost or doing collecting waste from restaurants and using that to create natural fertilizer for food and for development of food. And that, of course, is a huge opportunity. We are very food insecure as a region. We import much more of the food than we produce. And again, when you have global value chains being disrupted, we will be deeply impacted. And water is, air first, then water, then food in terms of what you need in your
Yeah.
Maslow's hierarchy, and you can't survive without being able to provide those to your people. So certainly food security and food secure solutions and innovations would be a huge opportunity. But where we see a lot of investment going right now is in blue economy. So anything to do with fishing sustainably or using ocean resources sustainably. We're seeing a lot of excitement around transforming sargassum, and lots of different businesses starting up about transforming sargassum into things like biogas, into different products that can be used, because sargassum, obviously, with the heat is taking over. Using things like lionfish, we're seeing some exciting things where people are
Yeah.
doing different things with lionfish and
Yeah.
creating new solutions.
Mhm.
We're seeing some exciting things around using AI to predict fruit yields and creating cooperatives around collection and flash freezing of fruit and vegetables. We are also seeing simple things like eco car wash, which is now in 10 different territories.
Mm-hmm.
A typical car wash uses 80 liters of water to wash a car. This has reduced it down to 2 liters of water and created environmentally friendly detergents that don't harm the environment so that you can wash the car quickly and efficiently
Yeah.
using this eco car wash. And what's more, each island that they go into, instead of creating a conglomerate, they are creating entrepreneurship opportunities for youth. And so we're seeing a lot of these. We're seeing like people getting into beekeeping and ensuring that the bees continue to pollinate the flowers that allows us to create the food. So we're seeing all kinds of very, very simple things, and people who don't always even realize that they're part of our climate solution, food security solution, etc. But
Mm-hmm.
the more that we can think up, what are some ideas for solving the problems that we're already seeing on the ground? Issues of heat, of flooding, of food insecurity. Let us figure out ways to solve the problems. Don't create something for the sake of, well, this is cool. Create something that solves a problem, and then there's an opportunity to get that not only funded, but also to get that developing and moving into new markets.
What I
Excellent.
mean, that's so interesting that you said that, Raquel. I mean, what just came to my mind is community-based solutions, to what we were talking about earlier. In a community, you could say, this is the beehive community, and they specialize, you have 4, 5, 6 homes, and in their backyards, they produce, lots of honey, and then they're able to trade it or sell it to other communities or throughout the country, and helping to build those small little ecosystems of excellence
Yeah.
within the communities, not just within an island, because I think starting at the community level will help to scale it. And I think that's where we typically have challenges, is in scaling. When we looked at agriculture back in the 70s and 80s, yes, we were exporting our bananas and we're well known for those things. But what happened? Latin America came along and
Yep.
just said, well, I have hectares of land.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. We'll
So
take
any
over.
coconut you want or banana you want, I can sell it to you at 25 cents on the dollar. So um, all of a sudden, our agricultural exports, which is really where we need to get to. We need to get to a stage where we're exporting our solutions and our services to Africa, to other continents, to the global north. And I say Africa first because I remember we have business partners in Africa, and Javon and I were having a conversation with one of them in Kenya, and they were going through mass flash flooding. And one of the things that we said is, Kenya could really learn a lot from our Caribbean disaster and environment management team, because they go through these things in a different country every single year. It's always something different. And we always wondered whether there's that collaboration. That's something that we can export, that expertise, that know-how, that knowledge, to a large country like Kenya with millions of people. But again, it's sort of pulling those things together, and that's why we have people like you there to help
Make it happen.
pull in and be the glue and pull it all together,
Mm-hmm.
as hard as it may be.
One person, you're beginning to sound like an evangelist as well, and I love it.
No, I've been sold.
Consider
I've been sold.
yourself appointed. Yeah, let's do it. It's interesting that you mentioned sort of community collaboration. There's a project in Haiti that we're really excited about, and it's called a community garden. And it's in Haiti, the word for a community garden is a laiku garden. And what they're doing is communities are coming together to grow food that they will, one, eat, but two, the excess they will then sell to create money for the community. And we love projects like that and want to see far more of that kind of thing, because that is, the kind of thing that will then, as you said, would scale, would start at the community level and then
Yes.
begin to scale. The mention of Kenya, though, I'm so excited about Kenya and so much that we can learn from them as well. I mean, what they've done with mobile money, I don't think has been talked about nearly enough.
Yep. Yep.
And that the sense of innovation that's coming out of Kenya. But what
Yep.
is one of my favorite projects out of Kenya, and you're gonna see why I'm so biased, is a young gentleman who is a Caribbean, his parents are Caribbean. He formed Hello Tractor in Kenya, and it is the Uber of tractors. And that's not an official statement because obviously Uber is a brand,
Right.
but you literally have tractors that are available for rent on an app by farmers, so that if you can't afford to buy your own tractor, you just rent the tractor for when you need to use it, and then you use the app. The app determines how much you use of it, and then that gives you your price, and then somebody else comes and picks up the tractor, and then they
Yeah.
use it. So you book a
That's
tractor.
fantastic.
And he
Excellent.
has exported that all over Africa, and there's an implementation, I believe, in Jamaica of Hello Tractor. And so those are the kinds of things that we want to see. We want to
Yeah.
see these South-South collaborations where businesses are being established and then being scaled and being shared, especially in environments that are similar.
Yep. Yep.
But
Yeah.
we need an enabling environment for that. I mean, it goes back to I mean, within our own region, if we're having such a difficulty trading amongst ourselves, how do we then say, okay, well, let's bring in Ghana and let's bring in Kenya and let's
Yeah.
bring in,
Yeah.
when there are no direct flights
Yeah.
between the
the
Caribbean.
region. Yeah.
And by the way, when you look at the map, the distance between Barbados and
And West
Ivory
Africa.
Coast,
Yeah.
it's like that's a 5-6 hour flight if you
Yeah.
go straight across
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
Atlantic.
Yeah.
But I have to fly to Europe and then or New York and then New York to so and so and make my way down. So yeah, I mean, and I know that there are initiatives and I know that there are direct flights being set up between Nigeria and the Caribbean. I think there was a direct flight to
Antigua.
Trinidad.
And Antigua Barbuda. Yeah.
So more of that is what we need, and I think we need our people to be moving and to be generating that sort of those sort of opportunities.
Yeah.
And then the governments now enabling that environment by lobbying for additional investment, by lobbying and pulling together investments on our own to kind of put forward and say, look, here's a pot, right? Let's get the best 10 ideas in 5 countries and let's pull it all together. And poor you have the task of doing these things. I'm sorry.
Somebody comes to me and says, well, government should be doing this and government should be doing that. I always ask, who's government?
Yeah,
Government,
correct.
government
Which
is the
government?
voters. It's us.
Correct.
Yes.
So
Yes.
don't relinquish your power to some other source. The government does what the people who vote require it to do. So we have to
Exactly.
take that responsibility seriously, and we
Yeah.
have to understand the power that we have. And yes, we need to bring more people along with us. And that point about connectivity in Africa, I was once in one country in Africa and had to go to another country in Africa and had to go through Amsterdam. It was insane.
Wow.
I was like,
You came out of Africa to go to Europe to come back into
how?
To go to
Africa.
Europe to come back into Africa. It's
And
insane.
that was the most direct route. I was like,
And
Look.
I kind of feel like it's deliberately set up like that, but I think that's a awful
That's a different conversation. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
different
that
conversation.
is a don't get me in trouble today conversation.
No, then I'll get on my soapbox and then
Yeah,
it'll all
we
fall
all get our
apart.
own, so you know what I'm saying? That is problems.
We'll all get canceled together.
You know what I'm saying? It's like those three. I don't want to see them anywhere near.
Correct.
You know,
Correct.
you know what's interesting? You know, talk about opportunity. I was in Dominica 1 year for World Creole, and one of the things they did very well is agro-tourism. What it was, I was there doing some stuff with the Discover Dominica Authority, and they arranged for a tour to one of their farms. You went up the mountain, and went on the first time I ever saw vanilla. You know, I love vanilla ice cream, and the plant itself.
Wow.
You know, I was I was like a schoolboy. I was like, oh, right, this is what it looks like. You know what I mean?
Vanilla.
But Yeah, exactly. And it was an experience to go to the farm and the farmer's walking you around, showing you obviously his different not just what he's growing, methodologies being employed, different yields, for instance, but also too, like with the vanilla and showing you, hey, this is the vanilla ice cream that you eat and whatever else you use it for, this is the plant. You know what I mean? So I found that to be quite interesting. And I don't know how many of the islands, because I don't see it in my island for sure. And I've traveled to some other places in the Caribbean where I don't really see it. And I wonder how many of the islands use this? Because we talk about tourism as being one of the mainstays of the Caribbean's overall economy. But how many islands actually employ agro-tourism? Is that something you see an uptake, Raquel, as you move around the region?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, like Grenada does amazing things with like their nutmeg.
Hmm.
Trinidad, while our whole tourism product isn't as developed as the rest of the
The
region,
region,
but
yeah.
we are doing amazing things in cocoa, for example. And there are like cocoa tours available in where is it? Somewhere in the Northern Caribbean. Well, I'm sure I could do like a coffee tour
Hmm.
In
in
Jamaica.
Jamaica.
Jamaica, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So there it happens, but we also need to be more cohesive and collaborative on how we market these opportunities so that people understand that these things are available, understand where your food comes from, what are the, again, centers of excellence across the region, what islands make what best. So there is so much more that needs to happen to get the word out.
yeah,
And I think that collaboratively marketing the region is something that is low hanging fruit for us that
yes,
we definitely need
yeah.
to think through.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, Raquel, listen, we know you're busy. You've got things to do. We've had a riveting conversation, and three of us, we could go on about some things here on this
Oh yeah,
conversation.
oh yeah, oh
you know,
yeah.
so but we're cognizant of the fact that you've afforded us some of your time today, and we're so appreciative of that. And the conversation has been most enlightening. I've learned a few things here today. So as we look to bring the conversation to a close, John made a very interesting point, and I'd like to ask you my final question to you about. John spoke about food export, and I'll tell you why that struck out for me. I've lived in England, I've lived in Spain, I now live here in Canada, and I see a lot of our food being brought in not by us. And I'm not going to call names as to where the food is coming from, And I go to buy dasheen, for instance, because I love my dasheen, and this guy is telling me it's $6.99 a pound. And I'm like, you must be out of your cotton picking mind.
Wild.
You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? And the thing that struck me is that how is it more of our islands, the Jamaicas, and speaking of which, actually, I heard the prime minister or the president actually of Guyana, because I think it's president they call him there, and he was doing a presentation where he said Guyana aims to be self-sufficient in food, but also to export. And I was pretty excited when I heard that because I'm like, I want to hear more of this conversation from regional quote unquote leadership.
Yeah.
And as I said, John brought up the point, but maybe I should ask you directly what more needs to be done regionally so that we have more exports out of the region into the diaspora so I could buy my good dasheen from Jamaica or Trinidad or somewhere?
Selfishly.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
selfish
It's
question,
my question.
Javon.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
about your dasheen.
I remember one time I was in the US and my daughter was like, "Oh, I want a mango." I was like, "Are you mad? Mango's free home."
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Paying
So
$3 for one mango, like, hello.
buy
Buying
some
mango,
half
Yeah.
ripe
You
gross
know?
mango here.
Yep.
I want,
avocado.
Yeah.
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 Oh my
Yeah,
God.
Yeah.
Insanely expensive. But I
yeah.
will tell you this, my position is a little bit differently. I think we need to be processing. So, yes, we want to export raw materials, but we absolutely need to be focused on producing finished goods and exporting. So, first, I would say let us regionally collaborate. And I believe that CARICOM is pulling something together about where would have the ability to produce the chickens, the tomatoes, the all of these things for various islands so that we can at least establish first our internal food security. And then when we move to the point of export, what are the things that we can process and make sure that we have high-end goods that we can then export so that we are benefiting on the value of those, the end value of those products. Because a lot of the exports that we do have go to intermediaries who then process the goods and then sell them at market. A lot of the foods that we see, like dasheen, etc., those are coming from other places that are shipping the raw material. So we do need to focus on what is the whole value chain and how do we get in at the highest possible point to get our products and services out there, and then work our way back from that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jonna.
Yeah, no, amazing conversation, Racquel. It's been so great catching up with you, hearing from you, getting a better understanding of what we can do as individuals, as a community, as a country, and in the diaspora. I think all of those things are important because we're making progress, but we still have a long way to go. And as you said, we don't want to miss that curve, and we want to make those leaps. And I think, the solutions that you're working on and the projects that you're pushing through are going to get us there. So we really appreciate your time and the work that you've been doing.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And I'll be in Barbados a couple of times by the middle of this year. So I will
Well,
definitely
yeah,
look you up and we'll catch up on
you know what you have to do.
those conversations that we can't have on.
That we can't have online, correct. And Javon is going to be down in a month or so. So
Yes.
hopefully we can sync that time and we can all
Absolutely.
get together.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
exactly. Gonna have a good little soiree, that would be really nice, But Racquel,
Yeah.
thank you so much. My takeaway from our conversation, we can innovate more when we collaborate, more
Yeah.
regional collaboration. From the community level, from the leadership, regional institutions level, we can innovate more when we collaborate. And I want to thank you so much. It's been an inspiration, it's been an education, most definitely, for me on several things that you've brought to the fore here. And I realized also, too, that we have synergy and other aspects, but off the record conversations, not for this podcast. But thanks for your time, and most importantly, thanks for your effort that you and your team you're putting in to ensure that the Caribbean, we don't just talk and we're not just observers, or we don't just aim for the categorization of victimhood within the climate change conversation, but we're actually actively doing things to ensure that we are proactive in mitigating the effects of climate change, and also to the spin-off economies that could come from that for our young people, but also to for the members of our Caribbean community whom we're all hoping to advance and make better day by day. So thank you so much, Racquel. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.